Islam is a missionary religion. It sends missionaries all around the world. It has large colleges and training schools and theological colleges to train people. And there are many wealthy Middle Eastern sponsors of this endeavour. People with oil money to spend in this, who spend millions of dollars towards this work. Promoting Islam and inviting people to Islam is what's called Dawah. And tonight I want to look at several areas of how Muslims do Dawah and why people are open to these methods and why people are open to the work that they do. Well, the first one I want to look at tonight is the Dawah that comes from the freedom that we have in Western countries. We have incredible freedom in the West, freedom of speech. And this freedom Muslims use for doing Dawah. At the universities, they have their Islamic awareness weeks. They can have their bookshops. They can go door to door if they want to. There is freedom to speak, to put things on TV. There is great freedom. And people in the West are encouraged to look at other cultures. We're encouraged to be considerate and engaging and interested in other cultures. And the Islamic world and the Islamic civilizations are very attractive in terms of their art and the culture that they've developed over many years. There are also Muslim friends. Many Australians have Muslim friends. They're just their friends as anyone else's are their friends. And they're interesting, and it's interesting to find out about these people and their background. And so with this freedom and this engagement that we have with Islam, it provides ample ground for Muslims to be promoting and to be doing Dawah. And of course, it's very easy for a Westerner to convert to Islam. Any one of you here could convert to Islam and you really wouldn't have any problems. Would your parents kill you for converting to Islam? See, if a Muslim converts to Christianity, death is a very real issue. To be ostracised or killed by your families. In many Islamic countries around the world, if you convert to Christianity, you will die. But it's not like that in the West, is it? So we're encouraged to engage with other cultures, and if we want to become a Muslim, then that's fine. We have the freedom to do so. Another way of Dawah is the whole discussion within religions itself, the discussion of peace. And Islam is promoted on the basis that it's a religion of peace. This is particularly around what's called Sufi Islam. Now, Sufi Islam is more of a mystical strand of Islam that goes across both Sunni and Shiite Islam. Sufi Islam is the religious concentration upon the inwardness of religion, about your own experience of God. It's not like the extreme fundamentalists. It's even said to be true Islam. Of course, the Orthodox Sunni and Muslims reject Sufism, but it's very popular in the West because it is a peaceful face of Islam. They will say that we all worship the same God, the same prophets. The Quran is the latest revelation. And so for these Muslims who don't accept all of Islam's teaching, they provide a nice face to Islam. You can come and enjoy with us and have the ecumenical experience with us of discovering God in ourselves. You don't have to accept all of Islam's teaching. That's what they show. You can be a Muslim but not have to accept all of its teaching. It can be interpreted in other ways. Of course, Islam hasn't brought peace wherever it's gone. But yet peace can be a basis, and a successful basis, for promoting Islam. Now, the place of women in Islam, while in many ways is offensive, and there are many women in Islamic countries who are fighting for basic rights for women in those countries, for women in Western countries, for some of them there is an attraction about Islam. Islam offers women safety. If you cover up, you will have safety in an Islamic world. By and large, most men will respect you and you'll be safe. You'll be protected and your dignity will be respected. You'll have a specific identity. By dressing that way, you will fit into a certain box, which means I know who I am. I know how I relate to others. Things that we don't really have in the West, where we don't know who we are or how we're meant to relate to others. Of course, the flip side of this is that in Islamic countries, if you don't wear the headdress, then you can be seen to be immodest and rebellious. And so, of course, you should be treated that way, as an immodest woman should be treated. It's also good for marriage for women. Because in the Islamic system, and this is for men as well, if you become a Muslim, they'll organise your marriage for you. Now, getting married is a difficult task, isn't it? It's difficult and frustrating. You may just find your marriage partner for life right there and then. It may be easy, but you may not. And if you become a Muslim, they'll organise it for you. And I'll say that is helpful. That is an attractive, helpful thing for many people. Western philosophies have ruined our traditions of marriage. And yet Islam still has a strong sense here, and so is of course attractive in this way. Of course, when Islam rules, what women get is very different to what women in the West experience now, but yet they don't see it now, do they? Politics is another way of promoting Islam or of doing Dawah. There are Muslims who, because they're part of our community, get involved in politics as anyone else would. But of course, some of them bring along an Islamic agenda to this politics. It can be at the local council level, or at the state level, or increasingly at the federal level, where they can bring about laws and work in such a way as to bring about Islamic laws to come in about when shops should shut, things not being open on a Friday, various things like that. They can bring the Islamic option to the political scene. Islam can also be promoted, and Dawah can happen through banking. You see, Islam teaches that there is to be no interest. And so under their banking system, you get interest-free loans. Now that is appealing if you want to buy a house. How would you like to buy a house on an interest-free loan? Just become a Muslim. Now, it's not as simple as that, because you can't actually have interest-free loans. So what it means is if your house is $100,000, you agree to pay $120,000. So you still end up paying the interest, but it's still different because it can't actually work. But they still do this. Dawah can be done through business. Business contracts can go more easily for your company if you've got a Muslim on board, or if the company is Muslim or makes allowances for Muslims. And so I've heard of business executives converting to Islam for business, because it opens up a whole lot of new opportunities, which it does. Another way that Islam is promoted is that it's said that Islam is a call for justice. In our world of injustice, Islam calls for justice. Of course, it's Allah's justice that it brings, it's the justice of Islam, but it's justice for this world. And for many people who are disaffected with Western government policies, the wars that our governments are involved in, the way that we've treated Indigenous peoples, that these people who want justice in these areas, the message of Islam is actually quite appealing. Let me just read to you one of the conversion stories from this account I've got here. In the early 1980s, against the backdrop of Reagan's presidency, Thatcher's rule, the communist and nuclear threat, turmoil and oppression in South America, the success of the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, Aboriginal land rights granted in Nukamba. My sister and I met some Iranians living in Sydney and running an alternative cafe called Freedom Square Cafe. Meetings were held there by South African groups against apartheid and Aboriginal activists. The atmosphere was buzzing with revolutionary ideas and the fight against oppression. The cafe supplied the food for the first Rock Against Racism concert. It was in this atmosphere that my younger sister and I were introduced to Islam. We learnt a lot about Islamic history and the revolutionary aspect of Islam. I saw photos of the Iranian Islamic Revolution and was amazed by the multitude of people in the streets ready to die for their belief. The belief and determinations of millions of people was able to topple a despotic, military-backed government, the largest military presence in the Middle East at the time, an American puppet government. A merciless dictator with a feared and brutal secret service was defeated by their love of God, freedom and justice. I was impressed because as a Christian, I had heard about the church leaders talking about subservience to dictators in South America and South Africa. Christian leaders often told the masses to be patient. The meek shall inherit the earth. Turn the other cheek. In sharp contrast, Islamic leaders were saying, the leader you have is the leader you deserve. And so that girl and her sister converted to Islam. It wasn't necessarily that she believed Muhammad was a prophet or anything, she probably does now, but it was the call for justice. I don't agree with the wars that our country is in. I don't agree with the way the Aborigines have been treated. In fact, Islam is very appealing to Aborigines with its call for justice. It is interesting that after September the 11th in 2001, when the World Trade Center was attacked, that many Westerners converted to Islam. Thousands converted because of that event. You thought they would have been turned off. But those who are disaffected with the West said, this is the new group to join. But of course, it doesn't bring justice. You look at the Islamic countries where it's ruled, it doesn't bring justice. It's a false hope, though it is an appealing hope to those disaffected with the West. Now, all of these provide opportunities for calling people to Islam, for explaining Islam. All of these things that I've just looked at. But what I want to particularly look at now is training in Dawah. That is, the types of training that Muslims get to explain their faith to others and to be able to call people to Islam. Well, the first thing to realise is that Dawah begins with nominal Muslims. Dawah begins with nominal Muslims. So the zealous Muslims will look at the general Muslim population and say, we need to get them on board and train them up. This is done through having Islamic schools, of which there are many, many in the Western country being built, and in our universities, funded from overseas, from oil dollars basically, millions of dollars going to building schools to get the nominals on board. There are also a lot of youth centres and programs run for Islamic youth to get them on board and to get them to be devout Muslims. Most of the young Muslims in the West really aren't committed to Islam at all. And so it's through schemes like this that the keener Muslims are trying to win them over to have them live as devout Muslims. And of course, for those Muslims who are keen, there's training that they can get on how to share their faith and how to engage with the Western world. Now, one of the men who has done this in a far greater way than any Muslim I've ever seen, and almost any Christian that I've ever seen, is a man named Ahmed Deedat. Ahmed Deedat trained millions of Muslims through his work. He wrote many different booklets, short booklets, not big books that people never read, but short ones that people would read. Here's one on Christ in Islam, what the Bible says about Muhammad, is the Bible God's word, and Al-Quran, the miracle of miracles. So he wrote all these short books. He got involved in many debates. He went to England in the 80s and challenged the Christians there to a debate, and none would debate him. And the Christian who ended up coming to debate him was completely annihilated. The Christians in the West were completely unprepared for what was coming. And he started doing these debates, and through these debates, he had them videoed, And videos were a very powerful tool of showing a debate to someone. We'd like to give people books, but the Muslims rarely do that. They give them a video to watch, far more entertaining, far quicker to do, and in many ways convincing. You watch two people have a debate. Ahmed Deedat actually used to edit his debates very much, and it's worthwhile to even have a look at them if you see one of them to see how they did that. It's interesting though that Muslims aren't debating as much now, because when Ahmed Deedat started debating, our Christian leaders knew nothing really about Islam and were unprepared. But that's not the case now, and now they lose when they have debates. And so they're hesitant to take up debates and in fact don't even like it as a method anymore. But the apostles debated in the New Testament. Jesus debated in various ways. Now there are a couple of common areas in which Muslims are trained to be able to explain their faith. One of them is to say that Islam is a simple religion. It's a simple religion. There is one God and Muhammad is his prophet. And it sounds very simple, doesn't it? Compared to trying to understand the Trinity or how one man dies for the sins of another. It sounds very simple. Of course, it's not true. If you become a Muslim, you then find that there's all these other rules and regulations that you're to do about how you eat, sleep, go to the toilet, all these things you've got to do. It just goes on and on. But it's a simple religion. Christianity is a complex religion. Christianity is actually a very simple religion. We don't have any of those rules and external ceremonies that they have. We have a very simple religion. Islam is also promoted through being a moral religion. You see, Christianity has failed. That's what they would say. Christianity has failed in the West. Look at the West, the Christian West. Islam is not like this. Islam is a clear direction. Islam is what we need to answer the problems of the Western world. Of course, the morality in Islam is actually a lower morality than what's in the Bible. So it's hardly an improvement on Christianity, and in the end can only have this morality by enforcing it on people. Another way they'll promote Islam is by saying that Muhammad was the best of men. Muhammad is the greatest example. He is a grace and a mercy given by Allah to us, and we should copy him and emulate him. Now, Muhammad certainly did have his good characteristics, but he also tortured people for money. He also had people assassinated who spoke out against him. He married a girl when she was 6 and had sex with her when she was 9. He is hardly a model for us today. But one of the main ones that they use is the argument of the Quran. And they promote the Quran, as we saw in that book by Ahmed Deedat, as the miracle of miracles. And they see it as in promoting the Quran, as promoting Islam and drawing people to read this book. Now, how do they do it? Well, they do it in a few ways. One of them is that they will promote the Quran in such a way as to discredit the Bible. Let me read you this quote on your notes there. No other book in the world can match the Quran. The astonishing fact about this book of Allah is that it has remained unchanged even to a dot over the last 1400 years. No variation of text can be found in it. You can check this for yourself by listening to the recitation of Muslims from different parts of the world. You see, there's the challenge. And of course, the problem for us as Christians is this. Who is in a position to know any different? I don't know any different. Is it really unchanged? Well, they're claiming that it is. Who of you here are in a position to check this for yourself by going throughout the world and listening to the Quran being recited by Muslims to check it? No one can check it. Well, you can check it, but we'll get to that later on. It's interesting to note that what they say is only one side of the story, because Muhammad himself never compiled the Quran. He died and the Quran was not compiled into one volume. And there were several competing volumes which had different surahs in them, and there was a process by which they were standardised. It came to a head under Caliph Uthman, where he standardised one version of the Quran and which surahs were to be canonical, and the rest were burnt. Let me read to you from the Hadith. It says, a man comes to Uthman and says, "Uthman, O chief of believers, save this nation of the Muslims before they differ about the book, the Quran." Uthman sent to every Muslim province one copy of what he had copied and ordered that all other Quranic materials, whether written in fragmentary manuscripts or whole copies, be burnt. You see, why is it that the Quran is so standardised? It's because there was a wholesale burning to standardise one text. Why is it that we don't really have any ancient Qurans? It's because they've all been burnt. And there are differences in the ancient manuscripts that we do have. I've given you 2 references there that you could follow up. But when we consider the oldest manuscripts that we do have, there are differences to the modern day Quran. There are textual variants. In fact, there are small differences in the manuscripts of the modern day Qurans that are used around the world. I have 4 different Arabic Qurans in my own possession. This is the Quran according to Imam Kalun. So you can't actually simply read the Quran. You have to read it according to a famous Islamic reciter of the Quran. You just simply can't read it. You have to read it according to someone. And this is according to Imam Kalun, and that's used across North Africa, well, the top of North Africa. The one used across in Morocco is by Imam Warsh. And it's got its small differences again. And then the one which is the most common one, because the Ottoman Empire standardised this version, is according to Imam Hafs. There's some other ones still used today in the Sudan. In fact, you can even get some books, which I can show some of you later on, which have all the different variants listed in the margins. So there's the text of the Quran, and there are all the variants from all these different other versions which are used today, listed in the margin. If you read the older Islamic commentaries, one of the first things they do, that the commentators do, is that they establish what the text of the Quran is. So they'll say, this bloke says this man says this, and they'll do the textual criticism first. So it's nonsense when Muslims try to promote the Quran over the Bible for its text. They have different histories, but what they claim about the Quran is just false. There are textual variants, and its history has been one of being burnt to be standardised. Another interesting way that they're promoting Islam is through science. You see, if science says something, the Western world believes it. Don't we? If science says it, if the church says it, you don't believe them. If our politicians say it, you don't believe them. But if science says it, you do believe it. And so many Muslims, not all, but many of them, have gone to great lengths to show how the Quran contains scientific information unknown at the time. And there's some notes in your handouts which are of an article where this has really been exposed for what it is, where they go around talking to these scientists and flying them into first-class hotels and saying, what about this, what about the Quran, and then just quoting snippets of what they say. And then using this to say that the Quran teaches embryology and the development of the human fetus, things that was unknown at the time. It teaches that the world is round. And they come up with all these scientific things, and it fools people. If they come up to you and show you that, just ask to look at the verse and read it in context and see if it has anything to do with what they say. It doesn't when you do that. In fact, the Quran teaches that the sun rotates around the world and actually goes into a muddy pool in the world. Now, it is true that the Bible talks about the sun rising and the sun setting, as indeed do our newspapers. If you get the newspaper, it will say sunrise, sunset. Of course, the sun doesn't rise, it doesn't set, does it? The earth rotates. But we use phenomenal language, and the Bible does have phenomenal language. But the Quran moves beyond phenomenal language. Let me just read to you from Surah 18 here. It says, they will ask thee, that is Muhammad, of Dhul Qarnayn. Say, I will recite unto you a remembrance of him. Lo, we made him strong in the land and gave him unto everything a road. He followed a road until he reached the setting place of the sun. He found it setting in a muddy spring, and found a people thereabout. Then he followed the road till he reached the rising place of the sun. He found it rising on a people. Now you see, that's actually moved beyond phenomenal language, hasn't it? It's not just saying the sun rises and the sun sets. It's actually saying that this man travelled so far, he found the place where it sets. And he found that it sets in a muddy spring. Muddy because obviously the sun going down there makes it hot and dries it all up. See, the Quran is not scientific. It has the standard cosmology of the early medieval period. Now, the other way in which Muslims promote Islam is they do so at the expense of Christianity. They do it by attacking Christianity. And so they'll particularly come to Christians, particularly nominal Christians, and attack Christianity and say Islam is better. Christianity fails. You shouldn't be involved in what you're involved with. You need to be involved with Islam. One of the ways they do this is to attack the Apostle Paul. They'll say that Paul invented Christianity and it's not what Jesus had in mind. And of course, at this point, they're just picking up the arguments of what other people have said within our own culture, as they want to have Jesus but not really attack Jesus, so they attack the Apostle Paul. The earliest Islamic source we have referring to the Apostle Paul talks about him as being a genuine apostle. So there's no basis for this in the Quran or the Hadith. It's just something that's one of their arguments that they've now developed. And of course, it's not true. Listen to what the Apostle Paul says from 1 Corinthians 15. For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures. You see, the Apostle Paul, everything he taught was according to the Old Testament. And so we must defend our apostle. Although it is a popular way of attacking Christianity to attack Paul, there's no evidence for it. What Paul says aligns with what Jesus said, and it aligns with what the prophets said beforehand, something that Muhammad's words don't do. In fact, almost anything that Paul says, you can find it in the Old Testament. And that's what you need to do for them, to say, no, what Paul is saying is in line with all of the other prophets. So we must defend our apostle, and we must force them to provide evidence for this claim. But they also attack the Bible by saying it's full of contradictions. They may quote the King James Version of the Bible, where it says, Jehoiakim was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 3 months and 10 days in Jerusalem. Now that's from 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verse 9. But in 2 Kings chapter 24, verse 8, we read, Jehoiakim was 18 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. Now, how old was he? Was he 8 or was he 18? You see, the Bible is full of contradictions. It's full of contradictions. Now, of course, if you read this in a modern translation, you won't have that discrepancy. The King James was based on a late manuscript, and as now through the Dead Sea Scrolls and other manuscripts that we have, we've been able to identify these copyist errors and to rectify them. But you need to realise that Muslims will know all of these. The devout Muslim will have a big list that some of them will come up and bring to you and say, look at this. The Bible is full of contradictions. Of course, it's an exaggeration, isn't it? We're talking about minute things that they have to really search hard to find. And it is in no way representative of what the Bible is. And because of the textual evidence that we have, you're actually able to spot them anyway. But yet they will bring these up. And if you need to get answers for a particular one of these, I recommend you go to the Answering Islam website and you'll find answers for most of these. They'll also attack the Bible for being corrupted. They'll say it's got contradictions. They'll say the Bible itself, the text is being corrupted and changed by people. Look at the end of Mark's Gospel. Go on, get out your modern day Bible. The end of Mark's Gospel, what does it say? It will say the earliest manuscripts do not have this part of the Gospel in it. You see, it's corrupted. The text is being corrupted. Go through your Bible and you see in the footnotes, some manuscripts say this. So you never have that with the Quran. You never have that with the Quran. See, the text of the Bible is corrupted. Now again, it's exaggeration because our textual variants are listed openly for us. We don't try to hide them. They're there. And they're only small. They don't make any difference to any of our doctrines, and you need to understand that as a Christian. We do have small textual variants, but they don't affect the meaning of the Bible, and we can actually spot where they are because we have so many ancient manuscripts to work with and to identify these and to establish a good text. Of course, it's hypocritical of Muslims to say this as well. They're the ones who burnt all the early Qurans to standardise one. How ridiculous to boast and attack the Bible when you burn all the Qurans to standardise one. And it's hypocritical when there are actually different Arabic Qurans being used around the world today. Now, there are only small differences in those Qurans, but there are only small differences in the Bible. It's exactly the same. The Bible has been well preserved. We haven't had any burnings. We have many ancient manuscripts that we can work with, thousands of ancient manuscripts, which allow us to be sure of what's been written. So you need to be familiar with those arguments because that's how they will promote Islam, by doing it at the expense of Christianity. So to conclude, Islam is a missionary religion and Dawah is the activity of promoting Islam. Dawah is happening in many ways around us. And if you wish to engage with Muslims, you need to be prepared for some of the methods that they use. Thanks.